Well, good evening and welcome to PJNET Live on Friday night. And for those of you who were here last night, I apologize for being so fatigued, so weary, and so down. Because all those things that I told you about that were so bad are actually mostly solved. For example, as you can tell, our studio is working. It wasn't last night. And not only have I got it working, I know why, and I know what to do about it and how to prevent it from happening in the future. By the way, how do you like my shirt? You can't see it, can you? How do you like my sleeve? And the shirt, thank you very much. There you go. I also was beleaguered last night about one of our speakers seemed to be malfunctioning. That is not the case any longer. There is a knob on the back of the speaker that is called limit, and it had simply been rotated in transit. There's nothing wrong with these speakers. And also, when we did this in the field in Montgomery over the week, we had the volume in the speakers at 50% and the limit at 50%. When you combine those two numbers, that's 25% output. And the music was huge. It was big. Okay? All right. Enough of that. I am going to attempt, and believe me, folks, this is not easy. This is not easy. But I am going to attempt to do the magic right now, and we are going to, from up there, I am going to tell the studio crew, that would be me, to please drop the monitors down and put them in place, and then we will bring on Roger, that is American refugee from the bayous of Louisiana, as those you see behind me. Hey Roger, you have a new set too there. You know, got some camo in the background maybe. That would that actually, you know, we were talking about putting some curtains back there to kind of obfuscate the bright lighting. You know, the reflection. Right. Maybe some camo netting would be appropriate.
Some camo netting might do it. Yeah, we need a little more work. We need a little more work, but we've got a good spot here at least with the light. We just need a little bit of a better background.
Yeah.
How are you today, Mark?
We're doing just doing fine. I feel much better now that things are back normal, and
okay,
things are stabilizing. Folks, I am still very much learning this incredibly powerful software, and I do not want to bore you. I know you would indulge me on the technical details, but this is a blessing. This software was something we put in our crosshairs 3 years ago. And it is far better than I imagined, Roger. There's things I can adjust, delays. There's latencies. It's really a professional, very, very professional rig. So just thank God. Thank God.
Now, thank God, Mark. I remember first talking about it a few years ago. But Mark, let's get right into it tonight.
What you got?
Let's get right into it. Well, we're basically in the third episode of our show dealing with the concept of being in a post-constitutional America and what we've got to do about it. And first of all, let me tell the viewers, Mark and I largely agree with each other, but there's a little space between Mark and I on this, okay? Mark's a little bit more reluctant than me to talk about post-constitutional America. And he's a little bit like, hey, man, the game hasn't been lost yet. If you tell them the game's been lost, you know, then what do? They just get depressed. Well, what I'm saying is this. It's not lost forever, but we're fighting to get our country back more so than we're fighting to save our country. To a large extent, we have lost our culture. We've lost our constitutional system of government. And right now what we're doing is fighting to get that back before it's too late.
Well, now, and I think you make a good point there, Roger, because it's really, when you say we've lost our country, which is not a literal thing, but actually I think the things that you see in Washington are a reflection of a degradation of morality and common sense in the culture itself. For example, let me give you a real-life example. People will sometimes say, boy, if we could just get rid of Nancy Pelosi, okay, cut the head off the snake, so to speak. if we could just get rid of her. I said, they would elect somebody just like her. She's from San Francisco. She is a product of the culture.
Mark, I don't know if you realize how bad it's gotten. She's getting a lot of heat from her left at this point. Okay? The Democratic Party is now, she is now the center of the Democratic Party.
Oh my
okay? Gosh. It's not the center of American life, but she's the center of the Democratic Party. And there are many on the left that can't believe how slow she is and how conservative she is, and that, you know, she doesn't want to do this and she doesn't want to do that.
Well, no doubt you're going to turn the spotlight on some of the sewage in our culture. That is it fair to say that as bad as that is, and we want to talk about it, that's still the minority? One of the problems I had when I used to go out with my father-in-law, he was a deputy, 100% of our time is dealing with the worst of society, and you tend to start thinking the whole world's like that. I used to fix telephone systems, and some of my technicians would say, well, you know, this phone system ain't worth a crap. And I would remind them that the only time you engage this thing is when it's not working right. 99.9% of them are working just fine. So should we keep this all in context as we point out the worst in the culture? That doesn't represent the broader culture, thank God.
Mark, it doesn't reflect the broader culture, but unfortunately, and I'm going to explain what I'm talking about here, they've taken over the institutions that are that will broaden it. That will further that will broaden it, will further death. Let me start off with a very simple example. When I was a little boy, I played Little League baseball, okay, and I played Little League football. And I would go to the playground, and you know, and I played Little League baseball and Little League football, and we had a coach, and we would pray before practice, and we would pray before our games, and it was an all-boys team, okay, both in baseball and in football. Mark, I can't let my son, if I had a young son, play Little League football today. In any type of a mainstream thing, because they are letting girls play Little League football with the boys. And guess what? My boy is not allowed to sack hard a female quarterback. My son will not be allowed to be a defensive lineman who's defeating a girl on the offensive line. My boy will not.
Look at the irony there. On the one hand, they scream equality. You know, that they want equal access to these venues, but then given equal access to the venue, they say, but wait a minute, we're girls.
Yeah. So you see, Mark, literally most Little League programs, I would argue now, in some small towns, maybe this hasn't shown its head yet, but in most Little League programs in major cities now, your child is going to be getting corrupted from the time that you put them in that program. Now, what's the answer? Because on the one hand, I want people to go out and engage, but on the other hand, we don't want our children corrupted. Okay? Well, one of the things that's going to happen is we as Christians. Okay, no, hold up. Boy Scouts. Okay, Boy Scouts.
Wild Bill just did one on that.
The only reason I wasn't in the Cub Scouts and the Boy Scouts is because I was the youngest of 7 children, and my father was tired. Okay, and my father was tired and didn't feel like, you know, the amount of work that was going to be involved, not just taking me around, but my dad was one of those dads that felt like if I was involved in something, he wanted to be involved too, you know, and he wanted to be one of the leader parents in it and stuff like that. But my older brothers were all in Boy Scouts and Cub Scouts. Okay, you can't, as a conservative or as a Christian, put your kid in Boy Scouts or Cub Scouts anymore. You can't do it. And expect your kid not to be horribly corrupted. There are now openly homosexual scoutmasters. There are now boys, girls, heterosexual and homosexual and transgender within the Boy Scout troops. I believe the Boy Scouts is actually changing their name, isn't it? Yeah, to the Scouts of America. They're dropping the boys and accepting girls. Now, that really ticked off the Girl Scouts because they want to have a reason to exist. But the Girl Scouts does a whole lot of stuff with Planned Parenthood. Okay, and the Girl Scouts has become totally corrupt. Now, you've got Patriot Scouts, you've got different Christian organizations, and that's one of the things I want to encourage people to do now. You can't just put your kids any longer in the organizations you were in as a kid. You have to vet organizations carefully, And you have to find patriotic or conservative or Christian organizations to involve your kid with.
Well, another casualty in this cultural war, it's funny because Wild Bill just did a video this week, and another casualty in that same war is the YMCA.
The YMCA is a huge casualty.
In fact, excuse me, it's no longer called that. It's called the Y.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not, you know, what does YMCA stand for? Young Men's Christian Association.
Exactly.
Yeah. Now it's just the Y.
Yeah, that's over with. Okay, that's over with. So one of the things, and look, some people think that certain things aren't going to happen to their kid. It's going to happen to your kids. So a lot of what I'm talking about now, and we have to talk about this because liberals think long term, and we need to too. A lot of what I'm talking about today is for parents and grandparents, okay? Because what I'm talking about is how our children and our grandchildren are raised, and making sure that our children and grandchildren are raised with the values where we can get our country back, where they're not raised with these disgusting values. People don't think it can happen, but let me tell you something. If you send your kid to public school and your kid is involved in Boy Scouts and your kid is involved in Little League, the left is in control of your child many more hours a day and many more hours a week than you are.
I'm going to bring up a point that maybe we need to save this for a different discussion, because I think what you're going to do is say we have alternatives, go to those. I think there also has to be, on balance with that, we need to prepare our children. Now, let me give you an example, Roger. And you and I have had a lot of discussions, you know, Southern Baptist Christian, Catholic, you know, blah, blah, blah. One time my daughter got invited by a friend of hers to a Catholic thing. Okay.
Right.
And I dropped her off, and in the parking lot, you know, I told her, I said, now, Shelby, this is a Catholic church. They observe different traditions. And I said, they'll be doing some things that you probably won't know what to do, and you'll feel a little awkward. I said, but respect their traditions, but remember that we have our own traditions. So on the one hand, you know, and I would expect similarly, if you had a daughter and sent it to a Baptist church, you might prepare that daughter or son in the same way, saying go and participate, have fun, and have fun with the children, but don't, you know, kind of put some boundaries up around the traditions that we all observe. Absolutely,
absolutely. Your kid might, you know, I might even have a kid who makes friends with a Pentecostal child, and is going to go to something that's going to be completely foreign to him, where everybody's speaking in tongues and getting drunk in the spirit and dancing in the spirit and stuff like that. And I will prepare my child in that situation.
Yeah, and not in a judgmental way, but simply, but at the same time, you do want to shield them somewhat from questioning their own faith and their own traditions of faith.
Yeah, exactly. Remember, it's not just the fundamentalists versus the Christians that have some areas of disagreement. Even within different fundamentalist, born-again Christian communities, there are some differences between the Pentecostals and others, and you know, and different beliefs, different traditions, and everything like that.
I may have taken you off track there, but I was going to say, you know, we can't just resist. We've got to equip our children to. We can't just protect them from the culture. We've got to equip them to be in the culture. Yeah.
We have to prepare them. So you don't want to turn them over to the culture more than they're within your own culture. One of the reasons I'm a big advocate of homeschooling, and we'll talk about that in the education show, but one of the reasons I'm a big advocate of homeschooling is just that I think children should spend more hours a day with their family than they do with strangers. Okay. I'm a big believer in that. Okay. That doesn't mean that I don't think kids should be going out into society and experiencing other things. We can't just protect them from it all the time, but on an hour by hour basis, I would like it if we had our kids spending most of their time in wholesome, familial type environments. As opposed to going out and dealing with the culture at large that has a lot of things that we may not agree with. But Mark, we have to be prepared to inoculate them. I have a friend who is a lesbian, okay, and now I'm going to use that term because she uses that term. I actually prefer to use the term that she has a same-sex attraction. okay? Because to me, saying someone has a same-sex attraction, okay, that's just a fact. That's just a problem that they deal with, but it doesn't necessarily connote that they live the lifestyle. Okay, and as soon as you say the word lesbian, people start assuming they're living that whole lifestyle. To be honest with you, I don't know all the details about my friend's lifestyle. I know she considers herself to be a Christian. I know she's largely a moral woman, but I know that this is a burden that she bears. Okay, is this same-sex attraction? She told me a story about telling her father when she was 10 years old that she wanted to be a little boy. Okay. Now, I'm not going to say that he handled it right, and she didn't say that he handled it right, but she said the way he handled it, and she talked about how much better that was than how it's generally handled today. What her father did is he slapped her in the face and said, honey, don't ever say that again. I'm not saying that's right, Mark. It wasn't the right way to handle it. But guess what the norm is today? They bring the kid to a psychologist who immediately says, oh, you've got to put this little girl on masculine hormones. You've got to put this little girl on puberty blockers. You've got to start the process of trying. I'm not kidding, okay? It happens. It's happening in mainstream medicine now, okay? And what's happening is that our little kids are going to school with other little kids that are going through this, particularly if they're in the public schools, okay? Now, this little girl in question, this friend of mine in question, one thing she told me, she said, I'm so glad that even though it wasn't the best way for him to handle it, that he slapped me in the face and told me never to bring it up again instead of starting to mess up my body by handing myself pills. She said, today, I'm about as well adjusted and happy as a Christian lesbian woman can be. Okay. And she said, I probably would have been one of those suicide cases if I'd had my whole body messed up and my whole mind messed up by being put on hormones. Now, people are like, man, that can't happen in my family. It can happen in your family if your kid is, it can. And particularly if your kid is going to school with other children that are going through it, if those children are starting to be treated like there's something special. Mark, I went through a phase where I wanted to be a horsey, okay? And they did not put me in a barn and give me hay to eat, okay? And, kids go through phases, okay? And
I mean, if you play cowboys and Indians and you assume the role of an Indian, are you now an Indian?
Right. So while I think we need to protect our kids from being absolutely inundated with this stuff all day, which is why I really do recommend things like homeschooling, things like the Catholic Youth Organization, if you're a Catholic, Youth for Christ type organizations instead of these secular organizations for after-school activities. We'll talk about more of that both in the show that deals with spirituality and religion and the show that deals with education. But I also want you talking to your kids about these problems. I got in a discussion on a Catholic forum the other day where somebody brought out a very old piece of literature from the 50s, a book from the 50s, and it was probably correct in the 50s. And it was telling you what to tell your 10-year-old kid, how to talk to your young child about homosexuality. And one of the things that it said, well, don't bring it up unless A, B, or C. And so it was saying only deal with this if you have to, if it's been thrust in your face. And they were kind of arguing this point. And I said, that might have been true in the 50s, but there's no such thing as it hasn't been thrust in their face now. It's on mainstream TV. It's everywhere.
Right.
Okay. Kids don't grow up without it. Mark, I go to a Catholic group for men who struggle with lust and are doing their best to stay away from pornography and live clean, chaste lives. And I have had guys in that group that are in their 20s that are talking about, well, I first started getting addicted to it when I was 10 years old and I got it on my smartphone. And I'm thinking, oh man, this is a different world.
So, it's different, yet when about what age do you think you first found a Playboy magazine?
A Playboy magazine that was a part of my friend's dad's collection that we went and hid and looked at together was a far cry from triple X-rated homosexual pornography and video.
Right, but developmentally, 10 years old is when you begin to discover sexuality. So
exactly,
but the technology has brought it to a scale and a scope to a center and a circumference that is way beyond anything we had to deal with.
So yeah, we absolutely have to talk to our kids about these things, and we have to start preparing kids for these things. They are talking about them in the schools. They're not talking about them the way we want them talked about in the schools.
No doubt.
Okay. They're not being talked about the way we want it talked about on the playgrounds. Okay. So your kids are going to get all this negative influence. So yes, we absolutely, totally have to start inoculating them against this stuff. You know, but we do have to keep engaging culturally, okay, and socially. And yeah, I read an article by Ben Shapiro this week. I want to recommend it to everybody. I think it was in the New York Post on Wednesday, and anybody can find it. And it's
Wednesday would have been March the 20th.
I think that was the date. And it's Mark Shapiro talking about being shut down and shouted down and protested on college campuses. And he was talking about how, 5 years ago that didn't happen. Okay, 5 years ago, he pretty much went wherever he wanted to go without security and talked. Well, now the left has overtaken the college campuses enough that, a liberal professor basically tells the students, oh, this guy's coming to talk, and he's just like a Nazi. Well, I don't know what they think, he's doing with the yarmulke on his head. Okay, but they will have a whole bunch of students just riled up who've never even heard of Ben Shapiro, that are convinced that he is the evil Nazi, and they're doing everything from threatening and physically throwing things, yelling, screaming, blowing whistles, setting off fire alarms, trying to shut down free speach.
Well, I don't want to preempt our discussion about education, but let me say this. One of the things that I learned in academic discipline was, follow the evidence wherever it leads and discover truth. So a college professor makes a statement. It goes not only unchallenged, it goes unverified and is accepted as the absolute truth. This is not academic rigor. It is the opposite of it. Right.
Now, within my educational show, I'll talk about how we educate our kids. But certainly within this show, we need to talk about how careful we have to be when we send our kids off to college campuses.
But I guess my point, Roger, is that we're in a culture where untruth can be spoken and it is accepted as truth without question and acted upon. That's crazy.
And Mark, look, here's the truth of the matter. Jerusalem, Athens, Greece, Rome, and the Vatican, Europe with the Protestant Reformation and the Enlightenment. These are basically the cores of Western civilization.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And there's disagreement there. You have the Jewish religion, you have the Catholic religion, you have the Protestant religion, you have Greek philosophy. Okay. You've got a lot of disagreement there. Okay. But they all work together to form the very basis of what Western civilization is. And our entire form of government comes from that. And the left is now rejecting those things. And the truth of the matter is, Mark, until capitalism and Christianity solved most of the world's problems, people didn't have time to worry about global warming. Okay? No, they didn't. We worry about fake problems today because it's not the brutal, harsh existence that it used to be. Jordan Peterson talks about this all the time. A lot of pregnant women, until really recently, used to die. Okay? And a lot of children didn't make it through their first year in life.
Infant mortality was huge 100 years ago.
And the disease and just the brutality of human life. And capitalism and Christianity basically solved most of those problems. Okay.
Well, there's a theory. Maslow has a really good thesis on
hierarchy of needs.
Yeah. And I think you're pointing in that direction. When you are only concerned with literal survival, life and death, you're not worried about some of these more abstract things that affect the broader culture. You're worried about how to eat. And once that need is met, there's 5 levels, and the 5th level is called self-actualization. So some of the liberals might cling to that theory, saying that this is progress, this is progressive, we are becoming more enlightened and reaching that level of self-actualization, which sounds like some sort of psychological utopia. It's
the problem is they're coming up with solutions that will recreate problems we already solved, so that people will once around again be sitting around in teepees, swatting mosquitoes off their back, sweating themselves to death, and they'll have no time except for to deal with those things. Mm-hmm. Okay, the truth of the matter is that it should be that the wealthier we are, but it's never been this way. But ideally, it should be that we become better and better and better, and everything like that. But we get confused, and we end up going backwards and doing all these things. I read an article about there's a class, University of Colorado, and it is called I think it's called A Survey of American Political Theory. Survey of American Political Theory. Okay, and it's a required course for political science majors, and the professor of this course decided that things had just been so focused in American political theory on white males, the founding fathers, and all these white presidents. And even our whole history, of course, going back to Locke and the Enlightenment and all of that, that he was going to teach a course that would not include any white males or any ideas ever come up with by any white males. Okay.
Well, but doesn't this concur? And I know you have studied. You're kind of a disciple of Jordan Peterson, as I am. This is a pursuit in academic sewage. Okay.
Yes.
It's exclusionary, and it's remaking history, and its ultimate destination is tribalism.
That is its ultimate destination, and the funny thing is that with all their talk of inclusion, what they're really starting to do is to reduce us to a bunch of different tribes again. That are all fighting,
and they'll be fighting. Yeah, this is the sad part. Is there's this movement toward this global economy, this global government. That nationalism is a thing of the past. That nations are actually just citizens in a global governmental system. Well, that really sounds real nice. Okay, however, what happens is you develop tribalism takes the place of nationalism, and tribes will fight and will war with one another for dominance.
We'll fight.
Oh, well, not only for dominance, but for resources.
Now, Mark, what do grandparents and parents do? Okay, because we're talking about this problem with college and with all the bad influences when kids go away to college and so on. What do parents and grandparents do? A couple of things I would argue. Now, first, I accept that a lot of people should go to college. Okay, and I'll talk about that in a second. But we have to stop pushing every kid into college. Mm-hmm. Most of them don't belong there.
Right.
And
absolutely.
And we've got to return to making sure that our kids either graduate high school with a trade, or that they have discovered a trade already that they're like, and that they're prepared to go to a trade school. Your kid's going to make a lot more money as a plumber than he is as somebody with a bachelor's degree in computer science.
Well, you're saying a lot here, and I don't know if we can get all this in tonight, but what you're going to hear is, see, when the Industrial Revolution came to be, okay, this was where our culture really shifted in a big way, because until that time, young men worked with their dad on the farm.
Correct.
Okay, they were an apprentice, and they learned a trade, a craft. When the Industrial Revolution came along, Dad no longer worked on the farm. Dad went to work in a factory, leaving the child with whom?
Mom.
Okay. And then began the feminization of the American male. Okay. And we are reaping the bitter harvest of this today, and it's going to get worse before it gets better. But you know what's encouraging is I am seeing, like, for example, the governor of Florida talking about trade schools. Okay, you said get a high school diploma, and I wanted to interrupt you and say, no, just learn to think. Okay, yes, get a high school diploma, but a high school diploma is no longer evidence of are you competent and are you literate and are you capable of being self-sufficient out in the broader culture.
Right. Kids need to develop critical thinking skills. They need to be illiterate, and of course, I think they also need to be steeped in our history and civics and all of this to be capable of going out and doing it. But aside from that, okay, a lot of kids are going to go to college. A lot of kids are going to go to college. A lot of kids might want to be doctors or this or that or the other or various professions where going to college is the right thing for them to do. This is, again, where parents and grandparents have to, before that, realize, don't say not in my family. They're going to try to turn your kid to the left and when he is in college. And you need to make sure that your kid has a very, very strong foundation spiritually, educationally. He needs to be prepared for what he's going to face when he gets into college.
Well, in my own life, Roger, I think when I went to college, I was exposed to a lot of, I studied sociology and psychology at the Florida State University, which is considered the Berkeley of the South.
Right.
Listen, I drifted, okay? I was as liberal as they can get. But because I had an anchor, because I had a foundation, I had something to come back to when I found out all that academic crap doesn't really work in the real world. But you got to have a foundation to come back to. You got to have an anchor.
You got to have a foundation to come back to. You got to have an anchor. Look, what has been taught in sociology courses for years is one of the things that has so corrupted police departments and one of the things that has so caused problems in crime. And one of the things that cities are now having to do is, rearrange their police departments because the sociologists came up with these theories about what would work and started putting it in there. Okay. Started putting, implementation of these things in there. And a lot of these things just didn't work in the real world. You know what one of the fundamental differences is between a conservative and a liberal, Mark? Conservatives tend to admit when their ideas haven't worked out, and liberals tend to keep doubling down on it. Most conservatives today who were very much in favor of the war on drugs will now tell you it didn't work, and there's other ways we have to go there. Okay, a lot of conservatives that were really in favor of. Mark, I'm being interrupted right now because I don't know how to change certain settings on my phone. I just declined the call. I had a phone call just ringing in my ears, blowing my ears. Okay.
Let me get back to going to college because I agree with you, but there's a dimension that maybe you were going to mention, so I'll preempt you. One of the problems with we got to invest in education for make our blah blah blah. Well, the problem is supply and demand. There was a day when people with college degrees were a rare find. Okay, those were the upper management people with engineering degrees or whatever. So you had a college degree was rare, thus more valuable. Today,
now
we are turning out
kids. Population over
we're
30,
turning out college degrees like sausages, and guess what? They're worthless.
Yeah, guess what? 30% of the people aren't going to be managers.
Well, I know plenty of people with master's degrees that are working at clerical position way below their educational achievement because we have inundated the market, we have oversupplied the market with college degrees to the point we have devalued that currency.
Yes, absolutely. It's also hard to cut the spending, Mark, and the spending's wasteful. My father spent his life in university administration, okay? And he sat me down and explained something to me one day. He said, Roger, he was a vice chancellor for administration at the University of New Orleans when he retired. But he said, Roger, if they put me in control of education in the higher education in the state of Louisiana, and I was a czar who could do whatever I wanted to do, I guarantee you I could improve the quality of higher education while cutting spending in half. But he said, let me tell you what one of the problems is. He says, a state the size of Louisiana, probably the University of New Orleans, LSU in Baton Rouge, and probably the LSU up in Shreveport, probably those three universities should offer everything. And other than that, you should probably have about four-year institutions that offer about a quarter of everything, each in one quadrant of the state. He said, Roger, Louisiana has 20 publicly funded four-year universities with duplicate programs being offered over and over and over again, and it's completely unnecessary. But it's almost impossible to get rid of, because just like you get these military town-based economies, you get these college town-based economies.
Yes.
And you have all these towns where the population's 10,000 when the students aren't there, but it's 15,000 when the students are there.
Well, as one guy put it, you know, those who are living on the teat want everybody else feeding the cow.
Exactly. Okay. And so he said, you know, he said it's just, he said, I mean, we could, he said we could shut down half the universities, sell off all those properties, raise all kinds of money,
and put them back on the tax rolls.
Not spend half the money that we saved, but reinvest the other half of the money into the other schools, and we'd improve education.
Wow. And how long ago was that when your father made this observation?
In the 80s. in the 80s, okay. And things have only gotten worse since that time. So yeah. I mean, that's just a whole nother way you could do it. But Mark, before we run out of time, there's a couple other things I want to get into, because I've talked so far mainly about what can parents and grandparents do to make sure that their kids don't get inundated socially with this stuff. How can they can inoculate their kids and prepare them for it? Mark, we can't pretend that we're immune either. I got to tell you something, Mark. If I turn on my TV and I watch a show that I intend on watching, but I got the day off and I just leave my TV on and don't turn it off, I get sucked into that TV. And on local channels and on, I guess, these national channels now that you just get on regular TV with a digital antenna, middle of the day, I get sucked into garbage. Okay. Make a confession, Mark. I enjoy an episode of the stupid show Xena Warrior Princess. I enjoy a stupid episode of the show Buffy the Vampire Slayer. There's demonic overtones. There's over-sexualization of things, though. Okay, it affects my spirit negatively, and it pulls me over there. Okay, and then if I change the channels and I say, okay, well, I'm not going to watch this stuff. Mark, when I watch these simple sitcoms, everybody's having sex with everybody in the sitcoms.
Right.
Nobody's going to church in the sitcoms. It's like the rare show that comes out on mainstream television where anybody ever says a prayer, or where anybody ever talks about God,
or anything virtuous. Anything virtuous.
Or anything virtuous at all. Okay. The movies, the same thing. Look, I love horror movies. Okay. They're bad for me. Okay. They're not good for my spirit. And one of the things that I've discovered, okay, in my own walk towards sanctification and in my own walk towards sanity, is I've needed to begin protecting my brain and my spirit from a lot of the things that are going to be in mainstream TV, a lot of the things that are going to be in mainstream movies, a lot of things that are going to be in mainstream music, you know, just a lot of stuff that's out there.
How well do you think shows like, whoa, excuse me, hello, that was not a bomb detonating. How well would a show such as the Andy Griffith Show or the Waltons do if it came out today?
Mark, I don't know. I think it actually might be more successful than a lot of people think, because I think there's a certain amount of hunger for it. But they don't want to make shows like that. They don't want to put out shows like that.
Right. Well, first of all, it would be censored. It would be opposed.
Whenever these, it would be opposed. It would be protested. They'd come up with why is there not an LGBTQ character on this show, or why doesn't Aunt B come out of the closet?
Yeah.
Okay. You know, they're trying to make Ernie and Bert into a homosexual couple now. Okay. And I mean, not literally on the Sesame Street show. They haven't gone there yet. But there are people that are out there saying, oh, yeah, well, Ernie and Bert have always been a homosexual couple. Okay. So, yeah, they don't let there be anything pure. They don't let there be anything innocent. They don't allow anything virtuous. And they just get shocked when, whether it's a high budget thing like Passion of the Christ or a low budget thing, even like the Left Behind series, ends up being really successful.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let me take you. I know I've taken you on many detours, but this is intentional. We have a question in the chat. Could you give us some examples of some of the practices in police departments that sociologists recommended? Now, while you're thinking about that, when you said that, in my own life, I have a friend in church who is a firefighter, has been all of his life. And of course, in the effort for inclusion and equality and all this, they had a male and a female in a fire station alone all evening. And that was, the evening shift. And of course, they both wound up being fired because guess what they wound up doing?
I'm sure they had sex.
That's it. And so now, of course, morally, that is wrong. They weren't married, and I'm not sure that the workplace is the right place to engage in conjugal relations. But nonetheless, my remark to that was, well, what did they expect?
Mark, there's a reason why Mike Pence doesn't eat lunch with women other than his wife by himself, and he doesn't take dinner meals. And he doesn't do a lot of closed door meetings with women. And the left is making fun of him for that, criticizing him for that. He's a man, and he knows he's a man. And he knows that he has the weaknesses that men have. And he's just set himself on a lifestyle where he's protected from that sort of thing.
Roger, I meet with a group of men, and I'll let you, we got to turn to the police department question and answer.
Sure.
But I meet with a group of men, and we've kind of made a covenant among ourselves that we won't get in an environment with another woman alone that's not our wife. Now, one of them works for the state of Florida, and he is required to travel in a vehicle, sometimes accompanied by a female. Okay, so we caution against that. But I remember one time an elevator came down and there was a woman next to me. So it was just the two of us, and I just opted to take the next elevator or take the stairs, And you say, well, there's nothing wrong with that. Well, of course, no, there isn't. But, anyway, the police department, tell us what the sociologists thought of and how it turned out.
Well, you've already given one of the examples because they were really big on putting male and female police officers together as partners. But let me give you some other examples. New Orleans has had serious problems with its police department. I mean, serious problems with its police department, with both corruption and incompetent officers and a shortage of officers. Okay. New Orleans at all times basically has hundreds of openings. For police officers that are unfilled. Let me tell you some of the rules that New Orleans put in place, okay, that were really pushed at by the sociologists. Every police officer should have at least, I think it's now 45 credit hours of college. Every police officer should have 12 hours of sociology. Police officers hired by NOPD should live inside of Orleans Parish because it causes problems when people are coming in from an outside community to police. So we shouldn't hire people from out in the suburbs to come in and be police. Everybody should be right from within. We have parishes in Louisiana, not counties. So everybody should be from right here in Orleans Parish, and a number of other things. Well, okay. Let's look at what this has done. There's a whole bunch of people out in Jefferson Parish that would be highly qualified police officers, but they won't come get a job in Orleans Parish because Orleans Parish won't hire them.
There are other people or can't move.
They don't want to move or can't move. There are other people, maybe their neighborhood's gone to crap and they wanted to move to the nice suburbs on the North Shore or something like that, and they had to leave NOPD and go to work for the Jefferson Parish Police Department or the St. Tammany Police Department because they didn't want to move. There's a lot of other people that say, you know what, $40,000 a year is a starting salary for risking my life, and I have to live where you tell me to live. and I have to go take all these college courses, okay, including 12 hours of sociology, teaching me a bunch of nonsense. No. So the very standards, what we've found out is there's not a whole lot of people that are dying to live in Orleans Parish, dying to get a year and a half of college, dying to risk their lives every day, and dying to do it all for $40,000 a year. So what ends up happening is you start hiring every minimally qualified candidate, okay, that you wouldn't have before because they can just check those few boxes. And you start looking the other way at, well, marijuana, that they've smoked marijuana, that's okay, that's not a big deal, and that's becoming more and more, they had an arrest here or there, but they were only misdemeanors, they had this, they had that. So we have both a shortage of police officers and incompetent police officers. And I don't want to tell them, there's some great police officers with NOPD, by the way. There's some absolutely awesome people, great people. But as the whole, the department has a tremendous amount of problems, a tremendously too high an amount of incompetent people, and a tremendous shortage of people because of these very standards that were created that they just thought, Mark, nobody wants to be told, I can't move 10 miles away or I lose my job. Okay. Yeah. Even if you're living in Orleans Parish right now, do you want to be told, I can't cross the county line? I can't ever buy a house across the parish line. I can't move into a better school district for my kids. Right. Okay. I can't do any of those things. So yeah, there's a couple of examples just right there. And of course, the sociologists have been very, very against minor crime policing and talking about it creating fear in the community. Broken windows policing works. When you enforce minor laws, particularly in high crime areas, it works and you keep things under control. Mark, I used to work as a security officer. And I can tell you, and so some people might have called me racist, but it had nothing to do with race. But I had different standards in different neighborhoods for what I would and wouldn't allow inside of maybe a grocery store that I was working. Because if I was in a grocery store that had an area that had an extremely high crime rate and a whole lot of drug activity, if they didn't respect me, if I let them push me around, or if I let things get out of hand, I was going to lose control of that store. Thus, no, you're not begging in the parking lot. No, you're not selling your CDs in the parking lot. No, there will be no dice games in the parking lot. No, you can't talk so loudly when you're in line that you're disturbing other. And by focusing on these things that a lot of people would have said, oh, well, that's nonsense, I didn't have the bigger problems to deal with because, people didn't challenge, people didn't challenge me. And I would notice it as I moved into management that if I would put a guard in a store that wasn't hardcore enough, he wasn't forceful enough, he didn't enforce things like don't use foul language, he didn't enforce things like don't talk too loud, he didn't enforce things like no begging, he would completely lose control of the store. And there'd be 5 different crimes going on in 5 different places at the store all at the same time. So the sociologists have been very upset about what they're talking about as broken windows policing and jaywalking policing. And, Mark, there's not a reason to enforce jaywalking in a neighborhood where there's no crime and where it's safe. But in a neighborhood where it's out of control, they need to see a police department that's taking control. Okay. And they need to see a police department that is enforcing the noise ordinance and that is going to go investigate because they find a broken window and everything like that. So those are some examples.
Good ones. And I could comment, but we were running long. But anyway, where did we leave off?
We're running long. So let's wrap it up. Mark, we're going to get into education next week. And, we touched on it a little bit in talking about what was wrong. Next week, I want to talk a lot about what we can do to educate ourselves and what parents and grandparents can be doing to make sure their kids get a proper education, both if they're homeschooling them and also if they can't homeschool for whatever reason. To everything from pressuring the schools to teach the right things and pressuring the school systems to teach the right things, from making sure that they know what's being taught inside the school so that they can teach some corrections in the home.
Well, an inoculation. You mentioned inoculation. We have to inoculate. We also have to counter program.
Exactly.
It is not the school's job. Listen to me. Let this sink in. It is not the school's job to educate your children. It is yours. Parents.
It's yours.
Okay?
It's yours.
You are to partner with your schools and keep those schools reined in. But at the end of the day, if your child is going to be taught the theory of evolution, they're going to be taught evolution as a fact.
Yes, they are.
Okay. Now, we certainly need to change that, but until such time, we need to teach our children at home that the book of Genesis is the origin of life. Okay. That's the origin of the species. Okay. and counter program. So, and let them know you're going to be exposed to other ideas, and let them know that we don't believe in those ideas. And here's why. And one of the reasons, Roger, that our relationship has flourished, even though we have some differences, and I say differences, there's some light between us, okay?
Right.
Is that we agree on fundamentals, okay? And unlike a lot of people, you know why you believe what you believe. And I have respect for that because at the end of the day, it's a faith. It's not a fact. It's a faith that we accept as a fact and act upon as a fact, but it's based on faith.
Mark, let's mention something right now, because I brought it up earlier and it tied at the very beginning, and it ties into what you're saying now at the end. There are certain principles that Protestantism, Catholicism, Judaism, and Greek philosophy all agree with, where all of that agree with this set of principles. And Mark, that's what our country's built on, and that is being attacked. That's what's being attacked now. Look, even the areas where there's all this agreement, that's actually what's being attacked now, socially in our culture. And it's a horrible thing, but Mark, with God's grace, we can fix it. With God's grace, we can get our country back. And yeah, I do kind of feel like we're in a downtime right now, and I do feel like we're in what I would call post-constitutional America. But I feel we can get our country back, and I also feel like whether we get our country back or not, if we're trying our best to, and we're keeping our relationship with the Lord right, and we're raising and teaching our kids properly, we will still have meaningful and justified lives.
And next week is?
Next week is education, Mark.
Education. That I look forward to that. Roger, thanks for sharing with us tonight. I know I distracted you and detoured you on many occasions. Not all of it was intentional. Some of it was. Okay. But we've had a good time tonight, and we always enjoy your thoughts. And let's see what kind of curtain or camo. Let's see what kind of new set Roger American Refugee has for next week, folks. And we'll see.
All righty, Mark. Talk to you later. Bye-bye. God bless. Okay.
All right, folks, that was American Refugee. Hey, I know that these things go kind of long, but I certainly enjoy a deep thinker and analytical mind such as Roger has. And he's always willing to share, and he's been there for us. He's in the great state of Louisiana. Now, let's see, tomorrow night. Now, I have been in some contact with Wild Bill this week. Wild Bill has been working Bike Week. He's also had the Constitution Party thing happening in the Orlando area. I don't know. I haven't confirmed with him that he'll be here tomorrow night or not, but let's assume that he will. And we've got a lot of good stuff coming for you next week. I'm off Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, so some of the footage that we have from the event in Montgomery from Wednesday, I'll be able to produce and share with you. And so for now, let's turn the helm back over to Hazards 4, where we can listen to some good tunes together there. And we will sign it off now here on PJNet Live.